Okay. All right, guys. Welcome. This is Agential Topics, sponsored in part by the Agential Biology Institute. I'm Charlie Munford, and the Agential Biology Institute is brought together because we feel there's a missing causal layer in biology, and we're here to try and surface ideas that give us testable consequences of that problem and ways to get some traction on it scientifically. I have a multi-speaker view done right now, and I think the recording requires a different one. So great. Okay. Now I'm on the screen. So today we have Stuart Kauffman, who's been a member of this group since the very first meeting. And he's going to give a presentation about his new book, Origins, Cosmos, Life, Mind, which is fantastic and so interesting and so on our topic. And I usually don't introduce the speakers at all and just let them dive right in. But today I wanted to give a tiny short introduction to the ideas that we're going into because maybe not all of you read the entire 528 page document that I sent you, and
Oh, come
just
on.
just in case, just in case, just in case, I wanted to kind of anchor this discussion in the problem of agency, the problem that we've been discussing for 2 years in this group, and we're trying to cumulatively build on the ideas that we've surfaced, see how they relate to one another, and get the very best ones on the table so we can discuss them as a group. And so far, that's been working great from my perspective. So, just to summarize and like set the context a little bit. So, for me, the problem of agency is the problem of the origin of the self. So, most of the people in this group are unsatisfied with explanations of that process that are just based on self-replication, because self-replication presupposes the self. And so we all wonder, many of us wonder, could it be that the creation of the self is prior to natural selection in some way? And is it possible to test that premise? Does it have consequences we can distinguish in biology, in other ways, in computational models, in chemical models? And so Stuart is asking, that question, but he's wrapping it up in a bigger burrito. So so he's basically, I think, in his book, and he can correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but um essentially he's asking how is mind integrated with the rest of physics, and that is the problem of agency. But he's looking at it in this broader context of what he calls the three mysteries of science, the three deepest mysteries of science, is the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the origin of consciousness. And so his answer is fantastically interesting and testable, and also a synthesis. So he's basically saying that just philosophically, the world is composed of res extensa and res potentia. It's ontologically real stuff and ontologically potential stuff, and that we are made out of both real and potential. Um, I think he says something like we are acausal mediations of potentia. So that to me has a very specific meaning and captures something that I've been trying to discuss in this group, with only sometimes even getting any traction on it. But it's the idea of possibilities. So he calls it the adjacent possible. And to me, possibilities are different from predictions, they're different from instructions. And that's what I think we're going to get into today. The evidence for his theory, he points to psi phenomena, telepathy, cortical correlation in twins, precognition, that sort of thing. And it's an explanation of quantum mechanics. So the idea is quantum particles can mutually actualize one another. Okay, so that's how potentials become real. And a collectively actualizing set of these potentials is a Kantian whole. and that's how he's explaining life, okay, as a Kantian whole. But for me, there's a little bit of something more to be explained because I think the universe also is a Kantian whole. So most of the universe not alive. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But chapter 7, 8, and 9, he gets into this concept and the ideas of life and how that relates to Joanna Javier's work, and she may be here today. But anyway, lots of resonances with um, pretty much the concerns of everyone that I know of in this group. So that's my 10-cent introduction, and from there, take it away, Stuart. We'll have questions whenever you want. We can start a queue of questions for you. So if you guys remember in the chat, there's a on the let's see, I think it's the chat button. They've changed it. No, it's the React button. In the React button, there's a raise hand icon, and you can press that, and you'll become part of a queue of people that I'll then call on to ask questions as we get further on into the discussion. So, thanks, guys. Take it away, Stuart. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks, Charlie. And I'm glad that you're all willing to listen to. It turns out I'm an old man. I became old rather suddenly a couple summers ago. I was sitting in the sun and I thought, I'm just like an old man sitting in the sun. And then I said, what do you mean, like a? I am a. It was a transformation. And some of you may go through it. So, Charlie, I do struggle with consciousness in chapters 11, 12, and 13 and 14. I'm not going to start there today. I want to I want to focus on the work in chapters 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 15. And I think I know what an agent is, but I will not yet talk about consciousness. So forgive me. We're all fascinated, including me. But I want to go somewhere else. So I'll just proceed. Our civilization, uh, we're in a significant mess. Let me sort of say it. And it all derives from Francis Bacon and Newton. Francis Bacon in 1620, in Novum Organum, said, let's quit reading Aristotle and focus on knowing how the world works. Let's put nature on the rack and rest our due for the ever betterment of humanity. It was transformative. Between that and Newton, a half a century later, who gave us classical physics, the Western world and now the first world civilization, the attitude is that the world really is a machine. It's and a machine has the property that it can be mastered. We can work out its laws, and then we have some kind of mastery and some kind of dominion. That dominion is part of the attitude in the West that we actually use a phrase like eco services. Just think how obscene the notion of an eco service is, that the biosphere is providing us. We've been here for 300,000 years. The biosphere has been around for 400 billion years, and it's actually providing us with eco services. So my way of saying it is, well, let me again mention Lascaux Cave in the south of France. 30,000 years ago, it's exquisite. Go there sometime. The Cro-Magnons knew that they were of nature. We now think we're above nature. We think we can control it. We think nature is a machine, and it's not. There's no agency in a machine either. So the framework is civilizational. So I now want to launch into grounds to say that life is not a machine. I'm going to give you a candid definition of life, a theory for how life arose. That theory carries with it, unexpectedly, a notion of what agency must be. And to my astonishment, in the last month, I have found a link to Aristotle's form and vegetative soul from 2,400 years ago. Life seems to be that, not the selfish gene. It's more than DNA replicating and encoded protein synthesis. Very mysterious. Uh, please see what you think. So let me try to now go forward and say what I do think. I want to say, I'm going to propose a definition, then explain it. I'm going to say that life is a union of catalytic and construction closure. It's going to turn out that that union appears to be a 21st century realization of Aristotle's form 2,400 years later. Maybe. I think it is. So, so here is Stu's favorite theory of the origin of life. There's really the RNA world, there's something fundamental in the RNA world that's perfectly intelligent. We need to think about the RNA world, said Jerry Joyce, because template replicating RNA or DNA, polynucleotides that template replicate, must be the basis of life because they are the only form of stable heritable variation that can carry heritable variation. We need some sort of molecular platform, and obviously genes and encoded protein synthesis and changing DNA sequences do that. Now I'm going to tell you that that view is just wrong. It's not that it's not true that DNA does that. It's that it's not the case that it's the only molecular platform. I'm quite sure, but then let's be critical. So let me talk about catalytic closure. I published this in 1971. In 1986 by myself with Don Farmer and Norm Packard and I. And Wim Hordick and Mike Steele have worked on this for many years now. So here's how we can get to autocatalysis. It helps to know the Erdős-Rényi phase transition in random graphs. So let me tell you, they published this, I think, in 1969, 1959, and I came across it a couple of years later. It's called The Evolution of Random Graphs. So a graph is a bunch of dots connected by a bunch of lines or vertices and edges. So what they did is ask the following. If you have 10,000 dots and you randomly connect dots with 10 edges or 100 edges or 1,000 edges, what happens? What they discovered, and this is wonderful, it's a first order phase transition. If you just randomly keep connecting pairs of dots, when the ratio of edges to dots gets to 50%, each edge obviously has two ends. So when the ratio of edges to dots is 50%, there's as many ends of threads as there are dots. And the wonderful Erdős-Rényi first order phase transition happens. All of a sudden, the system jumps from being largely disconnected to the emergence of a giant connected component. So that is the first order phase transition to connectivity in a completely random system, and it's full of cycles and it's just all perfectly well established. Well, I knew that, and this is about 1968 or 1969. So I'm wondering about life, and everybody knows that DNA replication works. Watson and Crick had done their thing, and semi-conservative replication was demonstrated. I found myself wondering, well, what if the constants of nature, the 25 constants, were different, and the universe could make atoms and molecules and reactions? Um, would life be ruled out if you couldn't make a double helix? And I thought, that's just nuts. What you need is a universe that's got atoms and molecules and reactions, and the molecules can sometimes catalyze the reactions. You need a set of molecules that mutually catalyze one another's formation. Therefore, they just keep existing, and they have to be able to feed on whatever's around in the environment. So they have to have some food. It has to be a non-equilibrium chemical reaction system. And I knew the Erdős-Rényi thing, and I thought, okay, I bet it's true. And I made a math. I proved some theorems, and then Don Farmer and Norm Packard and I in '86 made the first mathematical model. We modeled polymers as linear sequences with two kind of building blocks, A and B. And we thought of reactions as gluing together two sequences. So ligation or cleavage, you can break a sequence. And here's the fundamental thing. So molecules are combinatorial objects. As the diversity and complexity of molecules goes up, a molecule with more parts can be made in more ways. If you've got a sequence of amino acids, A and B, and if it's 10 long, you can break it in 9 places. So there's 9 reactions that make it. If it's too long, there's only one way to break it. So as the complexity and diversity of molecules goes up, the ratio of the total number of reactions in the system to the total number of molecules, so R over M, keeps going up. Well, it's pregnant with the possibility of connectivity. And if you just add a simple hypothesis that says, let's imagine that every molecule has some probability, p cat, of catalyzing any reaction, hold that fixed. Then, as you increase the complexity and diversity of molecules, the molecules catalyze more and more and more of the reactions. And all of a sudden, the Erdős-Rényi phase transition occurs, and a self-autocatalytic set just emerges into existence. So it's a theorem. It works. There's superb mathematics on it. So my belief is that molecular reproduction in the universe arose not by template replication, but by the emergence of collectively autocatalytic sets. So that's been a minority view. A hero in the story is Joanna, who you've met. She led a group of us that Joanna and me. She did all the work. She's now looked at all 6,700 prokaryotes, all archaea and bacteria, computationally, and in each one of them, she has identified a small molecule, collectively autocatalytic set, that may have several hundred molecules and reactions. Um, and it's just astonishing. These sets have no DNA, no RNA, no proteins. Um, every cell has them. Earlier work that she did with, again, her lead, but with Vim and me and others, uh, looked at bacteria and archaea from before oxygen's in the atmosphere, namely 2 billion years ago. They both have these collectively autocatalytic sets. The intersection of the two sets, archaea and bacteria, is also collectively autocatalytic, suggesting that archaea and bacteria diverged from a common metabolism. Okay. And so my own view is that molecular evolution arose in the universe by the formation of small molecule autocatalytic sets, and, and template replication and encoding arose later. It may be the case that this is now emerging as a kind of a common view. Anyway, I will hold it. So that's catalytic closure. Now I want to tell you what construction closure is. It's more recent. Um, Gonan Ashkenazi, I need to tell you this in some detail. Gonan Ashkenazi in the Ben Gurion has a 9-peptide collectively autocatalytic set. He worked with Reza Gadiri, and then he's gone off on his own. These are 9 peptides that are collectively autocatalytic, and it works in a test tube. Well, it's actually reproducing, and it's made out of peptides. So you can make a molecular system that is reproducing, and it's made out of peptides, and it works. Therefore, this is another alternative form of heritable variation that's not template replication, as pointed out by Ursh Strathmurray and some others many years ago. So the claim that life must be based on template replication to have heritable variation is not true. It's going to have massive consequences, so let's hang in with it. Um, So let me tell you what Gonan set does. We're going to get to thermodynamic work. So what is work? Work is force acting through a distance. You accelerate the hockey puck. Atkins, in his book on the second law, says no, work is much more interesting. It is the constrained release of energy into a few degrees of freedom. So what's that? Well, think of a cannon. It's a boundary condition constraint. Think of the powder at the base and the cannonball just distal to the powder. When the powder explodes, you don't get the spherical wave you would get if the cannon were not there. The gas escapes down the bore of the cannon, which is the remaining degrees of freedom, and it does thermodynamic work on the cannonball and blasts it up the mountainside. So this is about 25 years ago. In my third book, Investigations, I said, okay, it's really true. No constraints on the release of energy, no work. Okay, I got that. But where do the constraints come from? The constraints are boundary conditions, like the cannon. Newton needs boundary conditions. He never tells us where they come from. Next step is kind of obvious. It took work to make the cannon itself. It really did. We were all there. You don't remember the Big Bang, and there weren't any cannons. So work at least can construct a constraint on the release of energy because it can make cannons. And when the cannon fires, the cannonball could, bend a metal rod into a shape that itself could be used as a constraint on the release of energy. So we can then hold that in mind. Work can construct a constraint on the release of energy. Now look at Gonen's system. He's got 9 peptides, and he feeds in left and right half peptides of each of the 9 peptides, amino and carboxy terminal halves. He feeds in the half peptides. Peptide 1 literally acts as a little ligase. Peptide 1 is itself a boundary condition. It binds the 2 half peptides of peptide 2. By doing so, those 2 halves are not floating around in the test tube. So they're held in position next to one another. That, in fact, lowers the activation energy to ligate the 2 half peptides into a second copy of peptide 2. And thermodynamic work is done to make the second copy of peptide 2 and forming the peptide bond, and ATP breaks down to ADP. So peptide 1 literally constructs peptide 2. But peptide 2 literally constructs peptide 3. And 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So, and then 9 literally constructs peptide 1. I am going to mean by construction closure. This is a cousin of Mael Monteville and Matteo Mosio in 2015 talking about constraint closure. They mean that the constraints depend upon one another. I mean something, a restricted sense of their sense. I will mean peptide, constraint 2 depends upon constraint 1 if and only if constraint 1 acts as a boundary condition on the release of energy that constructs peptide 2. So Gonen's set is both autocatalytic and it literally constructs itself. Please hold this. It's not hypothetical. Gonen has one. So I begin to be able to say this. This Gonen's set is both catalytically closed and it constructs specifically itself. I want to hang on this example because it alters our intuitions. So what's going on is the peptides and the half peptides considered as substrates and products, the half peptides are the substrates and the peptides are the product, are autocatalytic. But the peptides also are the boundary conditions on the release of energy. So the peptides are both carrying out autocatalysis, and they are simultaneously the boundary conditions by which the peptides construct one another. Gonen's set is the union of catalytic and constraint closure. I'm going to argue that all life is a union of catalytic and constraint closure. I haven't talked about DNA replication or polypeptides or the codes at all. And what stunned me about a month ago is it turns out this may very well be Aristotelian form 2,400 years later. So, but I want to look at some things here as well. Gonen's set specifically constructs specifically itself. There is nothing here that is the dualism of software and hardware. There is no separate description of the system that somehow the system is mediating or copying or executing. It's constructing itself, and it's constructing itself, if you will, from the inside. So I don't think there's a notion of information here. So pause over information. Information is fundamentally representation and its use. So I have a Mondrian painting, and I break it up into 1,000 by 1,000 lines, so a million little pixels. And in each one, I use 10 bits to represent the frequency intensity of the light in that little bit. So 10 million pixels of information represents the Mondrian painting on my wall. Neat. Now, if you want to do something with that information, you send it by ether or you send it by carrier pigeon to Milwaukee, to a place that can print colored pictures, and the machine prints out a copy of the Mondrian painting. So we have a distinction between software and hardware. We have a representation, and then we have the use to actually make the copy of the picture. So this is really fundamental. Um, Information is independent, substrate independent, and we all know that. But substrate independent has no causal power at all. Paul Davies is wonderful. He's looking some way that information has causal power, and I don't know how he's going to find it. He's trying, and he's wonderful. So, but in contrast, construction, the constrained release of energy, Charlie, does thermodynamic work that is causal power. And what we see in Godin is something we haven't seen before. And let me say it explicitly. It is the causal power of organization itself. That organization of processes constructs literally itself. I don't think we've seen this before. So Gonin's set constructs itself. It has the causal power of organization, and it's another basis for heritable variation and natural selection. I'll get to that in a moment. So fine. Now what? Um, about a month ago, my wife Kate was talking about forms that I didn't know what she was talking about, and I remembered Aristotle talks about forms. I think what I've just told you is Aristotle's form. So let me get down to my paper where I've written down what a form is. Oh, yeah. So pause. Um, the system constructs itself. Now think of Bergson telling us élan vital, the mysterious life force. And he got famous and he got critiqued because it sounds utterly mysterious. What's the élan vital? I think I've told you what élan vital is. It is the union of a set of boundary condition constraints on a set of processes that harnesses the process to construct the same boundary condition constraints. It's a union of constraints and flows. So Gonin's set has in it élan vital. It constructs itself. So Bergson, I think, was right if we adopt this view. And, and, and then we're going to get to Aristotle. So let me actually read this to you. Um, so this is Chat's description of Aristotle. So Aristotle held, let me move this over so I can actually read it. It's fascinating. Aristotle held that every physical thing is comprised of two inseparable aspects, matter and form, hyale and morphe. The matter is what something's made out of. Here's what it is for this is not Plato, this is Aristotle. Form is the organizing principle that makes a thing the kind of thing it is. So the form of this oak tree is why it is this oak tree and not a pine tree. And in fact, not even a different oak tree. The form is the essence of a thing, its capacities, its purpose. The form of a thing is also what Aristotle called its vegetative soul, psyche, concerned with nutrition, growth, reproductions, maintaining life. Hold on to this, because form, from Aristotle, let alone Plato, was of central interest in Western thought um, in the Greek Roman world, in the Islamic world, through many years with great Islamic philosophers and mathematicians. It's central to Aquinas in 1250 in in pulling together Aristotle and the Catholic Church. So form was the central notion for on the order of, well, let's see, from at least 1,000 or 1,500 years. So that's Aquinas in 1250. A few years later, we get, well, not 1542, we get Copernicus, then Kepler and Galileo and Newton. Galileo is talking about matter in motion, and Newton gives us classical physics. So for Aristotle, there's four causes, which you know, formal, final, material, and whatever the fourth cause is. With Aristotle, as as as
Efficient.
uh, as Robert Rosen said, we only have efficient cause and matter. Everything else has disappeared. So Aristotle gives us classical physics, but essentially he lost form. So Western civilization with Bacon and the machine view of the world has lost Aristotelian form. But I think life is form. Now, let's try to get agency out of this. Let me slide this over. I'm sorry. Um, so, first of all, note that Gonen's system is doing thermodynamic work to construct itself. It's being fed from the outside. So, if it's doing thermodynamic to construct itself, it can do thermodynamic work on its world, right? Now, this thing is also a Kantian whole. Kant said an organized being has the property that the parts exist for and by means of the whole. Well, Gonen sets a Kantian whole. The peptides are as parts. Um, well, you're a Kantian whole. You exist because you've got a liver and a kidney and spleen, and they exist because they're parts of you. All living things are Kantian wholes, and I think Aristotelian forms. Now, I need to add one more fact that I think will be an agency. The universe is not ergodic above around 500 Daltons. Here's the proof. Think of a protein length 200. It's got 200 amino acids. How many possible proteins are there? Well, 20 choices at each for 200 is 20 raised to the 200th power, which is 10 to the 260th power. Now, could the universe have made them all in the lifetime of the universe? The answer is absolutely no. The fastest time scale is the Planck time scale, 10 to the minus 43rd seconds. The universe is 10 to the 17th seconds old, and there's 10 to the 80th particles. If all the particles were doing nothing on the Planck's time scale but making proteins of that length, it would take a duration vastly longer than the lifetime of the universe to make all possible proteins like 200 once. So it turns out the universe doesn't make all possible things above about 500 Daltons. I will mean by that that the universe is vastly non-ergodic. It will not make all possible complex things. I don't know if there's any physicists in the group. I hope so. So let me pose a problem. We all have a human heart. It weighs 300 grams and it pumps blood. Now, why do these things that are 300 grams and pump blood exist in the universe? It's not because the universe made all possible comp things of 300 grams, and among them, there's hearts, because the universe is vastly not ergodic. So, really, honest to gosh, to physicist friends, why are there hearts that pump blood? Well, roughly the following. Life arose. It was present on the Earth 4 billion years ago, and things got too big for diffusion to suffice. Wouldn't it be neat if there was something that moved fluid? So suppose there's a little tube that can squirt fluid. Neat. It then evolves into a heart. So now I need to come back to a Kantian whole. The whole exists for and by means of the parts. This gives a non-circular definition of the function of a part. In Gonen's set, the function of a part is that specific subset of its causal properties that sustains the whole. So the function of your heart is to pump blood, not make heart sounds. We have a non-circular definition of a function of the parts. So let's use it. Once you say that, the function of Gonen's peptide is to catalyze the formation of the next peptide, not jiggle water in the pericardial sac. And once you say that, parts have myriad causal consequences that might be co-opted and become other functions. And that happens all the time. They're called Darwinian pre-adaptations. So hold that. I'm going to get back to it in a moment. Anyway, why are there hearts? Because the function of your heart's to pump blood. So there are hearts in the universe because selection acting at the level of the Kantian whole has selected organisms to have functioning hearts because those organisms survive better if they did. They're the vertebrate lineage. And so for something like 400 or 500 million years, yeah, about 450 million years, hearts have evolved in the biosphere and been sustained in the environment because selection has sustained the function of pumping blood. That means we cannot explain the existence of a heart in the universe without basing it on physics. Physics has to allow hearts to exist. Then we need that hearts exist by virtue of their function. So functions are real in the becoming of the universe. That means we're not going to be able to explain physics, I mean, life, by physics alone. We're going to have to talk about why there are functions in the universe, and it's because of natural selection. So life is based on physics, but is beyond it. So now we've got that we have Aristotle's form. Uh, Now I want to tell you something about Aristotle's form. Um, Wim Hordick and Mike Steele several years ago looked at these autocatalytic sets. They call them rafts, not autocatalytic sets. Just hold that. And they realized something fundamental that I want to get across to you. Um, there's a notion of an irreducible such set. They call them an irreducible raft. Um, so I'll give you an example. I construct a second copy of Charlie. Charlie constructs a second copy of Joanna, if she's here, and Joanna constructs a second copy of me. Meanwhile, I construct a second copy of Bill and Mary, and Charlie constructs a second copy of Peter, and Peter constructs a second copy of Maurice, and Joanna just constructs me. If you get rid of Maurice and whoever I construct, that's okay. The system still works. But if I construct Charlie, Charlie constructs Joanna, and Joanna constructs me, you cannot remove any one of us without that little autocatalytic set of me, Charlie, and Joanna collapsing, right? Got it? So I make Charlie, Charlie makes Joanna, Joanna makes me. If any one of us disappears, this whole system just vanishes. So it's an irreducible set. The definition is if you remove any one member, the system collapses. So there are irreducible autocatalytic sets or rafts. And what so I want to get across the idea that such a little set, an irreducible raft, is a minimal self-constructing unit. Make them peptides, and Gonan said. He's got irreducible rafts of them too. So this is not a gene. This is not DNA. This is not encoded protein synthesis. This is not the representation of proteins by different kind of coded synthesis. It is the concept of a minimal unit of a self-constructing organization. A larger system, like Joanna's, they call a max RAF, is comprised by some underlying number of irreducible RAFs. Now, a single molecule or a single reaction can be in more than one of these irreducible sets. So an Aristotelian form has a construction architecture by which it constructs itself. It is made up of these overlapping integrated little minimal construction units. And each of them has the property that if it vanishes, it just vanishes. So more complex things are made by combinations of the minimal things. Let that be represented by all the letters of the alphabet. So A is a little thing and B is a little thing. So there's things that are the units of L, and J. If A no longer exists, neither does A, B, L, and J. And these little units are replicators by themselves, so they can transfer and be swapped between different larger sets. So these sets can evolve, as was pointed out years ago by Ursch and his colleagues. So that is the architecture of an Aristotelian form. And when one begins to see this, now I want to get to what do we think about evolution? We believe that evolution is, I'm getting off track. Let me go back to, I'm sorry, I'm slightly out of control. Once we say the universe is non-ergodic, then the Aristotelian form that constructs itself is persistently constructing itself. It keeps constructing itself. In the non-ergodic universe, I'm sorry, I lost track a little bit. Let's just go back. This Aristotelian form keeps constructing itself in the non-ergodic universe, and it keeps persisting and existing, right? That is agency. Agency is continuing to exist in the non-ergodic use because you're constructing yourself. There's no consciousness here. There's a system that has identity, Charlie, because it's this system that's constructing itself. So it's a self. It constructs itself. Therefore, it persists. Persistence, therefore, is agency because it constructs itself, thermodynamically doing work to construct itself, and can do work on its world. So it can act in its world. Furthermore, once there's this entity that persists, normativity enters the universe. There's good for the thing and bad for the thing, food and toxin. So good and bad and mattering enter the universe. I'm sorry, I've gotten slightly off track. It's still early in the morning. So I think we've gotten to agency. One more thing. Suppose this self-reproducing thing that can do work to construct itself has more than one dynamical attractor. Then in the same world, if it's in different attractors, it acts in different ways. So the attractors are categorizing the world of the system, right? If it's in this attractor and whatever is coming in across its boundaries, it does one thing. If it's in another attractor, it does something else. So the attractors partition its world into the ways it behaves if it's in the different attractors in the same world. I think we have agency. We have identity. It's a Kantian whole and an Aristotelian form. It specifically constructs itself, does thermodynamic work to construct itself at a level of complexity of hundreds of grams, where most such things will never exist in the universe. So it persists, it acts in its world, it can act causally on its world. It has causal power, Charlie. It is the causal power of organization. It can act in alternative ways if it's got more than one attractor. For it, there's good and bad for me. There's value. I think that's agency. So forgive me for wandering off in other directions. I'll go back there in a moment. But that means we have no notion of consciousness yet. So, imagine some bacteria and amoebae doing their thing. Well, they're doing their thing, watch an amoeba chasing a bacterium. Whether it's conscious or not, it's chasing the bacterium and it gets it and it eats it. That's agency. I think we can get to consciousness further. I don't think you need it for agency. So I think this is agency. So let's hold there. Let me summarize what I've said slightly out of order. We start with getting life to happen. Life arises, if my own theory is right, is some kind of Erdős-Rényi phase transition to molecular reproduction. The system that does that reproduction achieves simultaneously catalytic and constraint closure. It is Aristotelian form. And in a non-ergodic universe, it can continue to exist because it constructs itself and persists. So once it's in a non-ergodic universe, it's an agent. It can do work on the world as it constructs itself. And once that's true, good for me or bad for me, enter inevitably. So let me stop there. We can go back and talk about the open-ended evolution of the biosphere, which I wandered off onto a little bit. Okay, so let's stop here. I think that's agency. And I think it's Aristotelian form. It's very odd. I'm done. I'm sorry that I wandered off a little bit. Charlie, I'm done.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's beautiful. I really appreciate that. So I have one question to start us off, and you guys can raise your hands and go. But for me, so I get how the autocatalytic sets are a Kantian whole. I get how that's a strong case for an identity and a self, as distinct from the world. Um, I also get how that is a totally alternative source of heritable variation and natural selection. So it's sort of this different foundation on which to build a theory of life. But for me, agency, like saying that that is agency, it seems to create two problems. So the first one is like for me, I have trouble making that into a source of curiosity. So if we're grounding agency in the persistence of the Kantian whole, then by definition the Kantian whole reinforces its own conditions and keeps itself the same. And so I kind of find myself in the same place I did with Carl Friston's presentation where I'm having trouble getting out of the dark room problem. Like, why do I seek novelty if my whole goal is just to reinforce the persistence of what's already happening? And related to that question, I have trouble create it, it seems to impute the directionality to life that is the same directionality that I would have from a genes first perspective, which is the replication of what's already happening. And so I'm struggling to think of how experimentally to separate that theory from the genes first theory in a biological experiment, because if the directionality, the incentives are the same of the phenotype, then what do we move to test, whether it's one way or the other.
So, uh, I hear you. I started thinking about it, Charlie, is the following thing. Life is, let me get across the notion of an affordance. So, Gibson said a horizontal surface affords you a place to sit. So it's a triadic relationship. There's me, there's my goal, and there's a means to get to the goal. The means to get to the goal is the affordance. Living systems are non-equilibrium systems, and there's something fundamental. We always have to eat. Life has always had to eat. We have to keep going because we're non-equilibrium systems. That means life has always had to find features of the world that could support its continuing to exist. So, and once it's an agent, there's good for it and bad for it, right? So evolving life has always had to be able to not recognize, but cognize novel opportunities. And this is fundamental because Fristrom stuff is absolutely lovely, but it's in a pre-stated set of categories. Life keeps having to deal with creating new categories that are then new ways of existing. So that would talking about that will get us into Darwinian pre-adaptations and the fact that they cannot be pre-stated. Let me say it briefly. So to do this, we need no notion of mind yet. So Darwin pointed out that a structure that has evolved for one function would have other causal causes that might turn out to be useful. So your heart pumps blood, but it's a resonant chamber, and maybe it can pick up earthquake tremors. So if that's true, your heart could evolve to be something that cognizes earthquake tremors. It may be the case that lots of animals sense them in their bodies when there's an earthquake tremor. So that's a Darwinian pre-adaptation. It's not that there's intent on the part of evolution. It's just that there's a structure that has more than one causal consequence, and the structure can be co-opted for another function. And that's there once you say Kantian whole, because a function of the part is a subset of its causal consequences. So evolution is full of Darwinian pre-adaptations. My favorite is the swim bladder that came from the lungs of lungfish. And now the ratio of air and water detects neutral buoyancy in the water column. That is curiosity without imputing curiosity, Charlie. Evolving life keeps finding novel ways to make livings. So think of Stentor. It's a little one-celled creature, and you present it with a toxin. It learns that it's a bad thing, and if it gets utterly pissed off, it turns itself inside out and crawls somewhere else. Well, maybe it's conscious, but whether it's conscious or not, that looks like an agent to me. I mean, what more do we need? And it's acting in its world, it's turning itself inside out and crawling off on what would be its stomach if it had one, and goes somewhere else to get away from the toxin. We don't have to impute curiosity in the sense of our own human experience of curiosity to say that life keeps finding novel ways to make livings that didn't exist before. And those are ontologically new possibilities. And life keeps creating an adjacent possible into which it becomes. Let me show you that. So here's the swim bladder. The idea is that it evolved from the lungs of lungfish, and the ratio of water and air detects neutral buoyancy in the water column. And so that's the evolution of the swim bladder. It's why evolution is open-ended. And now think of this. Once there is a swim bladder, could a worm evolve to live only in swim bladders? Well, yeah, there's worms that live only in the lungs of sheep. So we might want to say that natural selection, quotes, struggled to craft a functioning swim bladder. But did evolution struggle to craft a functioning swim bladder such that it's an empty niche into which a worm could evolve and live? No. But that means something profound. It means without a selection achieving it, evolution keeps crafting novel pathways of becoming, and we couldn't have said it beforehand. So evolution is creating new possible ways of becoming over 4 billion years. And we can't say what they are. I could go into it a bit more. So curiosity is there, Charlie, in the fact that life keeps discovering ever novel opportunities and evolving into them. And I'm willing to consider that without invoking consciousness, a kind of curiosity. It's not that it's a curiosity, it's a life's finding out how to make its way by finding novel, ever novel affordances by which it can make its way. So I think this gives us a behavioral notion of curiosity, and they're in the Darwinian pre-adaptations that are around. And I'm pretty happy with that. None of this
Yeah.
is consciousness yet.
Yeah.
And I mean, consciousness is real. We haven't answered consciousness. I think we've answered agency and self and becoming and acting in the world and good for me or bad for me. And if we can do all of that without yet invoking consciousness, the basis of agency, I think, is in a Kantian whole Aristotelian form in the non-ergodic universe.
Yeah. Henry?
Oh, hi. Really enjoy your talk. So your talk makes me thinking how, I mean, you found that the evolution actually is a platform, kind of search for the adjacent, and create the novelty. But at the other hand, how the mechanistically, to create the novelty is a question we actually are interested. So it seems like you're talking about the phase transition. In fact, the evolution can be classified the chain of the phase transition. So the question we actually thinking if that's the case, and then we have some question to evolution theory itself is because, for example, if I fit landscape, everything is beautiful, it's fine. and the population is growing, the species is wonderful, but all of a sudden, they'll be replaced.
All of a
So
sudden, what, Henry?
they'll be replaced. They'll be, when have crisis occur, they'll be replaced. So they are not, no matter how powerful the evolution is, they are not powerful enough to survive, except a new phase transition.
What,
So
what,
here,
what, Henry, I'm lost. What do you mean? I sort of know what a phase transition is. We all sort of do. What do you mean here is a phase transition, Henry?
so the phase transition is a broader term in your chemical experiment. For all the random chemical after reach to 50%, all of a sudden they have the superstructure, right? So the phase transition. And for the cognition, then it becomes the consciousness, the phase transition. So the major evolution innovation is all phase transition. So if you're thinking this way, then you have to have more questions to address. The first is whether or not the picture you're showing simple chemical random become certain pattern, and then the consciousness going on, and you have to talking about that, the civilization, everything. But is a direction? So if there is a direction, what is the driving force for such a direction? So there could be, I just give the situation. I ask you the feedback and advice. Is whether or not actually we know the evolution right now, if we dissect different stage, we found that always just two phases. The first phase is create the new information, new species, new organization. And the second phase is boring. Second phase of evolution is absolutely conservation, because
Yeah.
you have just a phase transition, you back to the world one and to accumulate the change the frequency. So therefore, evolution, the job is take this phase transition, become biological process. Therefore, they no longer need from very beginning. So the next phase transition,
Hang on. We no longer need what? Just say it again, please.
we no longer need to do evolution again, because evolution already put the miracle become biological process. That's a routine. Every cell know how to do it. So then we're no longer talking about how the life evolve. Everything have nothing to do with when you have a first cell. That chapter is done. So next chapter is the next phase transition. For example, multicellular,
Yeah.
right? So every time going this way, so we actually found the evolution is nothing more but the trace, the push the information become more complex, and the carrier more complex, ecosystem more complex. So if
Yeah.
that's the case, do we can say the counting hole also be replaced? That's the first question, right?
Um, I'm not sure that the canteen hole has been replaced. Let me try to respond, okay? Um, I, Henry, I want to try the idea of nested Kantian holes. Okay, see what you think. Okay, so let me think of a prokaryote as a first order Kantian hole. So archaea or bacteria. A eukaryotic cell has in it prokaryotes. It's got chloroplasts and mitochondria. So a eukaryotic cell is a second ordered Kantian hole that has in it first order Kantian holes. A multicelled organism has cells that are eukaryotic cells. So it's a third order Kantian whole. You have an awful lot of bacteria who live in you. So you and they together are making your life and their life possible. It's a fourth order Kantian hole. I think there's nested Kantian holes, and I begin to wonder whether or not it's not true of the entire biosphere. So it all becomes oddly puzzling. So let me go back to, it's a terrific idea to have a heart, right? But Henry, it only makes sense to have a heart if you've got a liver and a kidney and a spleen. But there's no point in having a liver if you don't have a kidney and a spleen and a heart. So everything makes sense and its existence makes sense, but only in the context of everything else. And by the way, there's no point in having a heart if it's not some grass and rabbits to eat. But there won't be any rabbits, unless there's some grass and some foxes to keep the rabbit population down. So every species' existence depends upon other species. Everything is this blossoming, context-dependent Buddhist codependent origination where things come to exist together. I can hardly say this, but there's something utterly arbitrary about the particular molecules that swam into existence. But once they exist, they're utterly fundamental. If you've got a heart, you better keep hearts.
Sure,
But
sure.
there's a lot
So
of things, but there's a lot of things that don't have hearts. Trees don't, for example.
sure.
So
So
there's something
so
simultaneously utter, just I can say it, I don't know what it means, but somehow it's stunning. Everything is context dependent on everything else that
I
swam
got
into existence together and got ever more complex, but it could have been completely otherwise.
but if you're looking for the history, like you have different importance, but the information always pass by the tip of the iceberg. So now, for example, the bacteria, I mean, initially they pass the information, but when the eukaryote dominate, they no longer pass the information, they only provide the energy and the material. So the specificity continue going, like the different mountain is moving, but on the tip of the species pass the information. So
Look, let me raise something it's really puzzling. We live in the information age, and Turing told us all about it, and Shannon. So we know what Shannon information is. And we know that information is substrate independent. It really is. And I was thinking about the Landauer effect, that it takes some energy to erase a bit. But you're physically erasing a bit when you erase a bit. It's a physical act. So of course it takes some energy. There's something that has a causal purchase. You erase the bit. Gonin said it's not substrate independent, you guys. You need those specific peptides catalyzing the specific reactions that make those peptides. Construction is not substrate independent, information is. So my puzzle increasingly is I think I sort of know what information is. I understand Shannon. I don't understand how information on its own gains causal purchase. Paul Davies is brilliant and he wants to find a way in which information somehow itself gains causal purchase. He may have found a way. I don't see how. But boundary conditions define the phase space of a system. You alter the boundary conditions, you alter the phase space. Boundary conditions can constrain the release of energy. The constrained release of energy can do work that construct things like other boundary conditions. All of that has causal purchase. And I think Aristotelian forms, so interpreted, becomes the vegetative soul that's literally constructing itself. And
so
now I understand causal purchase as the causal power of organization. I just hinted, you guys. What does it have to do with information? Let me
sure.
get out one more thing, if I may, Henry, and then I'm sorry, just let me go on. So we think we understand evolution, and we say, how come you've got gill arches when you're an embryo? Well, we say, okay, because ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, and we appeal to DNA replications, and genes, and encoded protein synthesis. What if the second form of heritable variation is organizational forms? How much of the similarity of organisms down 4 billion years is not the DNA and the specific proteins made? It's the inheritance of the organization that constructs itself. And the fundamental thing is that organisms construct themselves, not describe themselves. How much, therefore, of evolution and the stability of forms, like morphological forms, is because the way in which the system constructs itself is herited, and genes are certainly a major part of it. I don't know the answer. Somehow we have to reconsider evolution to take in this the new idea that life has always been Aristotelian self-constructing forms. Meanwhile, there is DNA and there is RNA and there's encoded protein synthesis. What are the genes doing and what are the proteins doing? They have to always fit into the fundamental thing. Cells construct themselves. Now, how do we actually see that in a goddamn liver cell? The liver cell, of course, it's constructing itself. Nobody else is doing it. What are these construction modules? I can see it in Gon and Set. What is it in a liver cell that makes two liver cells? I'm so stunned by this because, we're all pretty smart and we know molecular biology, which focuses on the information content and the passing down of all of the information, and biology isn't the information science. Maybe biology isn't the information science as much as it is the construction science, and we can't even say it yet. I'm sort of thrilled and utterly confused, everybody. I really am. Yet
Uh,
there's something right about Aristotelian forms.
just one sentence. So when the information can self-creation, that become causation. I will talk more later on, to answer your question. Yeah, thanks.
Right.
Thank you.
That's really good, Henry. Thank you. Alex, welcome.
Hello, do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Great talk. I was at the summer school, by the way. I also asked this somewhat this question, Stuart, that I'm going to ask now because I think it's very connected to what Charlie asked. So I think that agency has two ingredients, as to say, two flavors, and both of them are required for self-construction. And I think that was what Charlie was hinting on. Um, at least to me, it's connected to this duality. So for an intuitive way to put this, in psychometric tests, for example, and in statistics in general, you have two ingredients, which is validity and reliability. So, for example, an intelligence test may be reliable if it consistently measures a person or a population in the same way, but it may not be valid because it's not actually measuring what we intend to measure. This duality is related to a very general duality in statistics, which is predictive power and interpretability or yeah. I think that these two things are related to, like, reliability is related to like communicability and consistency of the system in relation to its environment, while the interpretability and validity part is related to self-consistency. So I think that life requires these both things. Um, constructing oneself requires these both things because you need to relate to the environment, even
Yeah.
if the end goal is self-consistency because you are constructing yourself. But you can also imagine the opposite. Like, you can imagine that these two things are in service of reliability or communicability because, for example, you may inhibit your own behavior. You may try to constrain yourself a lot, like become self-consistent, but only because you want to be able to communicate to other people in a consistent way, or because you want to fit in the society and so on. So I think that life is not only self construction. I think that the relation to the environment is equally important. A reliable connection to the environment is equally important. These two things, these two elements are equally important, and sometimes we can imagine that the two of them are uh, are dedicated to one or the other, but it's two, and it's equally important. And I mentioned this in the question that I did you during the summer school, because when I said, okay, agency is not only self-determination, it's also like, already from a very subjective, intuitive sense, agency is the ability to determine the environment. And like the concept of power, for example, is related to that kind of feeling of agency. So yeah.
Alex, I think I agree with you and I like it a lot. Question. Um, if you're watching Stentor in its world, which is a single cell organism, um, can can we apply your notion to Stentor making its way in its world? And can we apply it to a fox? Well, sure, we can apply it to a fox, right? And we can apply it to us. So, what I'm asking is my suspicion is the issues that you're raising, in an important sense, are deeper than consciousness. I mean,
Yeah,
if you're Stentor, yeah, better construct yourself. You better be connected to your world. You better
yeah,
interact with it in such a way that you persist, otherwise you croak. So,
yeah,
so
yeah,
we need things like normativity. We need good for me or bad for me. We don't have to experience joy or pain, but it'd be nice if we do, because that would be a clue that this is crummy. So Kate says that by bride who you can see. So Kate says emotion is the first sense. It's sensing that the world is good for me or bad for me. So I can get to good for me or bad for me because I persist or not, depending upon whether it's food or toxin. I haven't says in what sense the system quotes knows it's food or toxin. I mean, it may just it has a bunch of receptors and it does one thing in one case and something else, in the other case, like it tumbles or it goes upstream in the glucose gradient. But it could experience great or yuck. So, one thing to try to formulate is what gets added to the evolution of life when we suppose experience. Okay. And I'm wondering if we can formulate that question in a way where we can actually ask it. And suppose
yeah.
that we could say, well, I know one that I got to you guys. We do multi-step jury rigging. Okay, like it was the Challenger or whatever it is, and something's busted on board, and it wasn't the Challenger. Anyway, they figured out it was a 17-step jury rig, and you cannot deduce the success, the different steps of the jury rigging because you can't. It's not deductive. Well, we do it. We do multi-step jury rigging, and multi-step jury rigging is odd because no step entails the next step, so it's not a logical deduction, and we can do it. And I imagine pillbugs can't, and Stentor can't. So you could begin to say it's just terrific to have experiences because you can do multi-step jury rigging. So you can find your way to really weird solutions to problems and stay alive. Now, I can kind of imagine, let's suppose that we accept that claim and criticize them. We say, yeah, it's really true. Could we look for signs of multi-step jury rigging? Along those lines, have you guys ever seen the films of the Caledonian Crows? I mean, they're just amazing. Aren't they great, Charlie? You want to be a Caledonian Crow, sharing, sharing, getting gumballs out of. So maybe if we could develop experimental tests to say, can we see signs of multi-step jury rigging?
Stu,
Yeah.
can you please ask questions?
Yes. Kate's telling me to let people ask questions. She's right. Anyway, that would be something that we might be able to do. My wife is right. It's time for me to shut up. Ask questions, please.
Great. Giovanna?
Hi. Well, thanks for this inspiring talk. And okay, so I'm interested in how you reconcile the ontological account of life as autocatalytic closure and this phenomenal aspect of life. And I'm curious also that you say that consciousness is not necessary for agency and therefore is not necessary for subjective experience. So if there is normativity, in kind of implicated in all life forms, like a simple bacterium is capable of evaluating, positive from negative stimuli, and to also, to sense the deviations from its preferred state. But it also has a capacity for memory, right? And it kind of remembers its preferred state to which it returns once the environmental perturbation changes it, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, like memory acts as an absent constraint. So I wonder whether that would kind of make the ontological and phenomenological frameworks kind of bind them together in a unified framework if we think of memory as, again, another set of constraints that acts even though it's not physically present.
I only partially understand, Giovanni. Please say it again. So, um, let me define a term. I'm going to mean by qualia and experience. The
Right.
color red and the feeling of pain and so on. So I will mean by the word sentience, conscious awareness. Of course, we've also got the unconscious mind, which somehow we don't shovel into our conversations. So I don't understand. Just say it again. It's you're saying something like the memory, which is not present.
Right. So like, okay, uh-huh. So when we're talking about experience, I guess you're assuming that a bacterium also has experience because it's capable of evaluating, sensing the deviations from the state and correcting that state, returning to its prior state, right?
No, Giovanna,
No?
I don't feel that I don't feel that we are forced to assume that the bacterium has experiences. I'm perfectly happy to think that it does. The question is what demands attributing experience? For example, multi-step jury rigging might be a case or not.
Right.
Uh,
Well, I guess, sorry. Continue.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, if a bacterium can, evaluate one stimuli or like a virus as negative and a nutrient as positive, so that does fit your definition of normativity. And again, if it's able to sense a deviation from its state and to return to its preferred state, it might also imply normativity. And then again, memory as well, right? Because every perturbation in the environment changes the bioelectric state ever so slightly. And then the bacterium has some kind of almost a representation, not a conceptual, of course, but like a sensory, even representation of the state that it should return to, right? So why not attribute experience to a bacteria then?
I can make a model, in fact, I have, in which I have the notion of memory without attributing qualia. So it's a system that has a whole bunch of dynamical attractors. And if the system is in one state, it's on an attractor. It returns to an attractor that it's been in before, and that attractor is the memory of what to do in a given environment. But it's just a dynamical attractor.
Right, but
So,
in that case,
but if you buy that, and we might or might not, then in order to have a way of dealing with an environment one's seen before, and you can go back to it, and you still can act appropriately in that environment, we can conceive of a physical system that does that without yet invoking experience. So we could have something that we would call a memory in that case. So if that's true, which it might not be, Giovanna, then we have to say if we see that, why are we forced to experience? Yet, of course, we want to be forced to experience because we, we're consciously aware. So where does that come from? And we all wonder that. What do you?
right.
So
Well,
I'm trying to respond. What do you think to? I don't know if I'm
yeah.
arguing with you or agreeing.
Yeah. Well, I think like in terms of an attractor state, right? So the attractor is usually present, even if, especially if we construct a system that attractor is always present and it's continuously pulling the or behavior of that system towards a particular organization, right? But in the case of memory, there's no physical storage, right? Not even in terms of our brains, right? So you can't quite point to a specific part in the brain where there's a specific memory. We can only measure synaptic activation, and only in the moment of recollection we can say, oh, this is where this memory is quote unquote stored. But it's just a bias towards a particular firing of neurons, right? But in the case of bacterium as well, I think it's pretty much the same, because that attractor doesn't exist as being physically there. Well, I mean, a memory of its preferred state. So once it loses that state, it doesn't any longer exist as a physical thing that pulls the behavior of bacterium towards, a specific organization. But it's actually like a memory of, how it used to fire in whatever it's identified as an most optimal state for itself. And again, what I mentioned earlier about it's evaluating stimuli and also changing that valence. Valence is not static or fixed, right? Bacterium can change its relationship to a specific stimuli, right?
Let me say one thing. If I've got a dynamical system with multiple dynamical attractors, like two steady states, okay? It can be in one steady state and it can shift to the other steady state. The system is capable of being in one steady state or the other. If it's in one steady state, the other steady state isn't there, but it's available. If you perturb the dynamics, it'll go to the other steady state. And why can't one steady state be, I'm in a good environment and I'm going to swim towards the food, and the other steady state is yuck, I'm out of here. So the other steady state is a memory of yuck. So Kate has written about this. In E. coli, memory is stored in methylation patterns this is Kate's work, not mine. And the methylation patterns decay slowly. And once there's a memory, there's the notion of being wrong, right? If you've got a memory, you could say, this is a yuck environment. It turns out it isn't a yuck environment, it's a yum environment, and you screw up. So memory has the possibility, therefore, of being incorrect. But although it can be alternative, stable, dynamical behaviors of a system, I think, and it doesn't mean that's what they are, but they could be. Do we agree? What do you think, Giovanna?
Yeah, well, I would definitely love to talk to you more about this, and I can email you after this privately. But I want to give other people a chance to ask the question. But yeah, if you're okay with that, I will email you through Charlie.
Well, meanwhile, Giovanna, the scene behind you is just wonderful. Where are those mountains?
Oh, that's in Croatia. That's called the Prokletija, or the Cursed Mountains. And yeah, it's one of the most beautiful sceneries that I've ever been to.
Oh gosh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you, Giovanna. Okay, Mary.
Hi, everyone. My computer is telling me that if I put on video, I will not be able to speak. So I apologize. don't have a great connection here in Maine. Stu, thank you so much for your talk and for your book. I love the way you're going cosmological. And I have
Well,
a
I am.
related question.
Yeah.
I have a related question, and forgive me if I am summarizing you inaccurately or too broadly, but from your book, it appears that you've offered the cosmos circulation, capacitance, memory, and mind, and you give Kantian wholes closure and affordances, and proteins have coherence. That's 8 of the 9 invariants that I call the invariants of a holon, which sounds very much like your Kantian nested holes. And so I want to ask, do you think that all of these may run scale free? And if so, then is the Kantian hole your name for whatever it is that has all of them at once at whatever scale? Well, I guess that's a separate, doesn't have to be a related question. And the other thing that I think is so funny is the 9th invariant you didn't mention is the one that Catherine provides, which is emotion and desire. So between the two of you, you've pretty much outlined the invariants of what I call the holon, and that you were calling the nested Kantian hole. So that's my question. And it's in the chat if you want to see it.
Okay. Could you just email it to me?
Absolutely. Yes.
Look, so What you said came by so fast that I don't have a direct response to it. Um,
Right.
but it's conceivable that we could think of the entire universe as a Kantian whole. And, I try it in the book. That doesn't mean that it's right at all. But it's interesting that that conception isn't obviously just stupid, or at least I think it's not just stupid. In which case, if a bacterium is a whole, well, I'm wondering whether or not your notion of a holon, which is also there in the 13th tribe, who wrote that? Anyway, I wonder whether or not a separate version of a holon is something like nested Kantian holes. And I think, Mary, that it may be the case that they're also something like, I guess, nested Aristotelian forms. It's just remarkable that this seems to be Aristotle 2,400 years later. This is now a month old, so I don't know what I make of what I'm saying. But
Well, everything you're saying is 100% resonant with me. And Catherine has even been talking about the resonant geometry, something that I started working with based on conversations with Richard. Gosh, was that 2 years ago? So seems like there's a convergence here I've written an outline of a paper that actually you almost could have written it. I'll send it to you and we'll see if maybe there's a convergence of minds between you and I and Catherine. And maybe
all right,
Richard, who knows?
good.
Are
No,
you, Mary, can I ask a follow-up to you? Mary, are you, when you say scale free, are you saying that, because biology seems to me is kind of what we call mesoscale. It's like from
Yes.
cell to organism, and then maybe ecosystem or something above organism. But then there's, planetary systems, and there's the universe, and down below there's atoms and molecules. Anyway, are you saying that those are all holons and they all have this common feature, or are you saying these common features give us criteria to distinguish life from non-life?
Okay, so that's one of my favorite false dichotomies. What I'm saying is that there appear to be recurring relationships, and this is something I've been having a conversation with Chris Fields about this. There appear to be he probably won't realize that I got this from the conversation, but there appear to be recurring relationships, and these relationships are definitely all there in mesoscale, and I'm not sure yet if there's a floor for them. This is something that I brought up in our conversation last month. That was a very fascinating presentation um, by somebody who I thought was in our meeting today. Anyway, and for example, the sun has most of the, as an example, has most of the qualities of a holon, but it doesn't have, apparently, as far as I can tell, return feedback from, its integrated parts, or if you see the sun as a solar system. So I'm looking at the floor and the ceiling here, and I'm seeing that. Um, if I recast them slightly differently, it appears that Stu doesn't see a floor and a ceiling. So this is a deeper conversation about these Kantian holons, I believe.
Okay. Got it. Awesome. Kate?
Uh, Thank you all. Thank you so much, Stu. I didn't mean to prod you, but
thank you.
how
You
I
were
am.
right.
And I just want to say, Mary, we are grotesquely overdue for a Zoom because there's much to talk about. Um, to me, our original conversation a few months ago that Stu referred to was about form and function, the relationship between form and function. And it was prompted by the discussion that Mike Levin is having about the Platonic space and Platonic forms. So I was arguing in that conversation that we needed to update the idea of the Kaufmanian whole to include both a stability that is sort of captured in the idea of eternal forms, as well as a dynamism that is captured in the Aristotelian forms. So that was it probably got into a heated conversation that didn't go anywhere. But what I'm suggesting is that the idea of form is fundamental to all of everything we're talking about, because form is first and foremost structure. It's a boundary, it's a shape. And that is from the shape comes the information. And from the information is a function, the communication, the signaling between molecules and everything that goes on in the body it kind of boils down to form. So I'm probably a little bit more Platonic and Pythagorean in my pursuits. And I've sort of planted my flag in the mysteries of quantum mechanics and the patterns, the mathematical patterns within and undergirding physics, and how we can reinterpret dropping agency and dropping consciousness or subjective experience back into the story. And I think that we get a much more cohesive picture that way. And my original complaint was a kind of a disjunction between what Stu just said about biological agency, trying to build a story without consciousness, without, all in terms of evolutionary theory. But then later in the book, when he talks about mind actually being the causal feature that pulls together the initial entangled pairs that literally construct space and time. I think that those are two different things that can be united. So that's what I'm hoping to find. And the examination of the concept of form through mathematics, through the wonderful guru of Lewis Kauffman, we get down to some of these really deep paradoxes like self-reference and self-reflection. So, but it all turns on a boundary. So my sort of big question here is that the canon story is a boundary constraint. It's a structure. You've even talked about the heart as a resonance cavity. And all I'm saying is that that principle goes all the way down in physics, and there's nothing mysterious about it, but there's everything agential and sentient about it in terms of how we resonate to a favored state that is least energy, that is least action. It's absolutely beautiful. And I'm really hoping that we can make some progress on that by defining a new Kaufmanian whole that's very much like the holon that Mary's working with. And by the way, on your list, I only counted 7. So I want to know what all 9 of yours are. And there was recently something put out by the Ken Wilber Institute, which I appreciate that perspective, that talked about holons and a whole set of criteria that holons have. And Mary, I can send you that link too, because I think what your list is more close to mine than anything, but they make some really important points about identity being dual all the way down. Me and we, parts and wholes. And the implication of that is profound for
I
us
think
as
I listen to
humans.
what I learned in this group from you too. So
Awesome.
So Stu, let's continue our discussion about form and function. And I'm gonna argue for both Plato and Aristotle, because we can really get agency. We can get much closer to agency if you like. So that's my comment. I'll save my questions for later.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Okay, Richard.
Thank you. What fun, everybody. Thank you so much, Stu. I want to say first how when you do great work and explain it clearly like you have, it immediately raises the bar on what people think is an interesting question and an interesting answer, right?
Wow.
So we're focusing on the bits of agency that we can't quite tick off yet. and ignoring the fact that you lay out a whole recipe, an ingredient list for a recipe for agency and tick off like 8 of them. And was like, yeah, but what about the 9th one? It was like, I wasn't referring to you, Lynn. 9 was a coincidence, but there are many aspects of agency that, that Stu has helped us tick off and say, I know what this is, I know what that is, I know what the other is. So bearing in mind that there's that sort of context, I wanted to nonetheless return to Charlie's question about curiosity and the concern that I share, which is that some of the principles of persistence and Kantian holes that you've been talking about have a potential to suffer from the same kind of problem that Friston's dark room problem has. That there's, yes, we've got something that persists. Yes, we have something that does work in the world in order to persist. That wasn't really what we were interested in. We weren't really interested in things that persist, even if they did work to do it. So first, let me clarify that by curiosity, I don't mean to invoke qualia or consciousness. I'm looking for curiosity that is about, well, you would put it, identifying and moving into the adjacent possible that wasn't there before. And I agree with you that life keeps discovering new ways of making its way through ever novel affordances. That sounds right. It does do that. I think that is close enough to what we might be reaching for when we say, where's the curiosity? Like, I want it to move into new spaces of new affordances, right? And I agree with you that life does that. However, I don't immediately see how the machinery that you identify helps explain how life does that. So the machinery that you identify, catalytic and constructive closure, Kantian holes, persistence, doing causal work so that something can persist, that all seems fine. That ticks off a lot of the ingredients for a recipe for agency that one might need. But how does that explain, use your words again, life's ability to keep finding and discovering new ways of making its way by ever novel affordances? I don't see how that machinery does that work. But some of the things which have been mentioned in the Q&A afterwards were things like, what about nested Kantian holes? Or codependent rising? What about scale-free Kantian holes and holons and the rest of it? That seems like territory which has potential to identify machinery that helps us understand how living things reach into those new spaces. And I wonder if you can give us your thoughts on how you get from Kantian holes to nested Kantian holes with dependent co-arising, for example. How do you make those mechanical steps from something which does work to persist to something which continually discovers new affordances?
Thanks, Richard. I mean, these are fundamental. So let me try on 2 levels. One, I know how to say one quite well. The other is quite new to me. So I want to get back to Darwinian pre-adaptations, or Stephen Gould and Verban Gould call them exaptations. And so let me now try to say it. The function of a part of an organism is that subset of its causal properties, it sustains the whole. But any part has myriad subsets of causal properties. So any one of these other subsets of causal properties might turn out to be useful and be co-opted in evolution, right? So for example, feathers evolved from structures on dinosaurs that were for thermoregulation, and lens crystals evolved from normally colored proteins that were enzymes. So this co-opting is standard, and I think that open-ended evolution derives from this. So let's talk about open-ended evolution. It's fundamental, at least so far, artificial life has never achieved open-ended evolution. It's the holy grail. And general artificial intelligence hasn't been realized either in computational systems. They may be related. maybe because they're both algorithmic and formal. So this is my mantra, Richard, and I've said it enough times that I just let me say it rather than debating it. So years ago, I started asking, well, this is Darwinian pre-adaptations. Could we list all possible Darwinian pre-adaptations? And I thought that would be really weird. So I started thinking about uses of screwdrivers. So let me utter my now canned speech. So, what can you do with a screwdriver in London in, March of 2029? Well, you can screw in a screw, you can unscrew it, you can use the screwdriver to wedge the door closed or open, you can scrape putty off the window, you can use it as an objet d'art. You can use it to tie it to a stick and spear a fish. You can rent the spear and take 5% of the catch, blah, 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 blah. So let's talk about that. Is the number of uses of a screwdriver some definite number like 7? Well, that just feels nuts. Okay. Is it infinite? Well, the beginning thought is how would we know? So I'm going to use a funny word. I was using it for years, and I think I finally figured out what I meant 8 years ago. I want to say that the number of uses of a screwdriver is indefinite. Indefinite is a very strange word. It doesn't map to the real line. I'm going to justify it. It took me 9 years to get to a definition of indefinite. And it took me 5 years to get from screwdrivers to an engine block. So what can you do with an engine block? Well, you can drill 8 holes in it, make an engine. Andrea Roli is my companion in this. You could store wine in the 8 holes. You can polish one side of it and it becomes a mirror. It's great as a paperweight. And then I realized that this is a triumph of my intellectual life. You can crack open a coconut on the corners of an engine block. So these are different uses of things. So I want to point out 2 properties. There's 4 ordering scales. One is just nominal, just the names of things. The next one is an ordering relationship. A is greater than B and B is greater than C, so A is greater than C. Then there's an interval scale like a thermometer, but 0 doesn't mean anything. And then there's a ratio scale, like a yardstick. What are the different uses of a screwdriver? It's just the nominal scale. There's no ordering relationship, right? They're just different things. Okay. Now, if I'm using the engine block to make an engine, can I deduce from that I can use the engine block to crack open coconuts against the corner? No. So this is fundamental. I'm now going to do, and can I list all the uses of an engine block? Well, how would I do it? Now it's now a theorem that you cannot put the uses of an engine block into one-to-one correspondence with the integers, so they're not recursively enumerable, they're not countable. That means we can't list all the uses. Now, if we can't list all the uses, we can't do set theory. Set theory has the notion of extensionality. 2 sets are identical if and only if they have the same members. But I can't prove that the uses of an engine block are identical to the uses of a screwdriver because I can't list them all. So I don't have the axiom of extensionality, so I can't use set theory. In fact, I can't use any formal system that has a predefined space of all the possibilities. It seems to rule out an awful lot of mathematics. But that means, now indefinite is the items are not listable, they're not ordered relative to one another, and they cannot be deduced from one another. So Darwinian pre-adaptations are indefinite. We can't say ahead of time what they are. This means something really odd, Richard. I think it's almost the ancient Tao. So the Tao says the Tao that can be said is not the eternal Tao. This says the world we can describe now is not a description of what it could become. So the eternal Tao is timeless. The indefinite has time in it. It's what exists now, enables an adjacent possible, but we don't know what's in that adjacent possible. That is open-ended. I think that is a sufficient description of open-ended evolution. And it's fundamental that it cannot be deduced. If it could be deduced, it would have been deduced. So it wouldn't have been open-ended. It would just been, you'd have been exploring a vast space by deduction. Evolution is not exploring a vast space by deduction or anything else. It is constructing ontologically real, ever new possibilities, and they're ontologically real. I mean, if the worm does come to exist only in swim bladders, then the swim bladder really indicated ontologically new possibilities. This species of worm could evolve to make a living only in swim bladders. Well, that didn't exist in the universe before there were swim bladders. So it means something very strange. It means that evolving life is creating ontologically real new possibilities. So that's open-ended evolution, I think. And what's fundamental is that is not Plato's eternal forms. Plato's eternal forms has all the possibilities ahead of time. And for Plato, is a requirement for explanation. We account for this as being among the possibilities. So Plato gives us the possibility of deduction and therefore universal laws. The Tao says what comes to be can't be said. There are no eternal laws. So I think what is happening, if this is right, is something very strange. It's stumbling across Aristotle from 2,400 years ago and forms, and it's stumbling across the Tao from 2,400 years ago that ancient China knew. But in the West, we were in love with Plato's eternal realm and universal laws. And the Tao is correct. There's aspects of the becoming of the world that are entailed by no laws. And that's utterly new. And it's where open-ended evolution comes from. And it's very weird. Done.
Can I check with you? Is it okay, Charlie, if I check something?
Yeah, we've got a couple more minutes, but
Can I check with you, Stu, whether you mean that to be an explanation of what open-ended evolution is phenomenologically, or an explanation of how open-ended evolution works, or a reason for not trying to find a mechanism for how open-ended evolution works
Oh,
because it isn't
that's great.
lawless?
I don't know the answer to your very good question. Let's try it. So, in the Platonic realm world, the idea was logos and the conditions of intelligibility, okay, which is your question. So, since Newton, our notion of what an explanation is, a pre-stated phase space of all the possibilities, laws of motion accompanying, identify the relevant variables, right? Laws of motion coupling them, identify the initial conditions, and integrate your equations of motion to get the deduced trajectory in, say, state space. The planets are in their orbits. And it's super. And it works. It's all of physics, and it's just spectacular. But it doesn't explain evolving life, whose becoming is not prestatable. So somehow if you accept the latter, what I just said, then what we mean by explaining has to be something different than what Newton taught us, but include Newton because Newton's right. And I don't know what I mean. I think it's at least, I think what I'm saying is at least the possibility, the ontological possibility of open-ended evolution that cannot be deduced. That's already a lot. We didn't know that. Now, when something arises, the way I account for it is retrospectively. I'm a paleontologist. And I ask, what happened? And I tell a story about it, Richard. I tell a story of how it came to be, but I couldn't have said it beforehand. Well, that's an explanation. We had bacteria, and then we got eukaryotic cells, and then we got the Cambrian explosion, and then we got vertebrates, and then we got Richard. I mean, that's how you came to be. And that is an explanation. but it's not a deductive one.
Mhm.
Well, so what? I mean, Newton makes us think that every explanation must be a deduction. But we don't do that in ordinary life, right? I mean, like, why did you go to the movie? The popcorn was great. So we're going to have to rethink what we mean by an explanation. I don't have the answer. And I just want to come back to this, since I've got the floor for a moment. How much of evolution, how much of ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is sequence specificity and DNA as the master molecule of life? And how much of it is the evolution of heritable Aristotelian forms, which are the causal power of organization itself propagating? And I don't know again, Richard, the ideas are about, a month and a half old. Somehow they're right. It seems like it's really profound, but I think it is, but I don't know. And it's just kind of wondrously confusing.
It is wonderful. Thank you so much, Stu.
Yeah. Please, like, help me think about it, or you go think about it. I got to die before I'm getting old.
I think we'll all be thinking about it. Anthony?
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Stu. I wanted to just dwell on your question or assertion or statement that information doesn't have causal purpose and the concept of
Purchase.
substrate independence.
Yeah, this is
Purchase, rather. Yeah.
This is Paul Davis's wonderful statement. It's how does information gain causal purchase? It's his question. It's a wonderful question.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I don't know if you've read a paper that was published recently by one of the leading AI researchers, Alexander Lechner, where he attacks computational functionalism again, the abstraction fallacy.
Anthony, what is that fallacy? Please explain it. I don't know what it is, so I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, it's the fallacy that effectively physics implements syntax or computation from which experience emerges, and that there is a dualist hardware-software differential versus substrate dependence, which effectively, describes the reality, which is the intrinsic dynamics, the physics instantiates experience, which constitutes the capability to conceive of concepts, which are invariants. Now, the reason I invoke it is because he's talking about computational functionalism there, but he's just about to publish his next essay, which is the information fallacy, which is effectively that, there's some physical system, let's say a human being, which experiences invariants from which it conceives of concepts, and those concepts might be Shannon entropy, bits and bytes. And the reality is the efficient cause of bits and bytes is the physical entity that conceived of the alphabet to describe bits and bytes. So I think I just want to make that point and then come back to networks. And you very elegantly described the Erdos-Renyi random network and how spontaneous phase transitions occur in that network. And of course, in the sort of network science lineage, then came Barabashi, Albert with scale-free networks. And what's interesting about scale-free networks is that we have this concept of preferential attachment, whereby the fat nodes attract more links, which makes them fatter, which means they attract more links. And then most recently, another collaborator of Barabashi, incredible intellect, Ginestra Bianconi, has started to focus on the geometry and topology of networks in multiple dimensions, and looking at structure-function relations, and even more extensive work she's done to try and describe the relation of entropy to gravity. And the reason I go on that little journey is because she's talking about a global attractor function of the universe, which is geometric quantum relative entropy. and the relative entropy is between the space-time metric and the metric that describes how matter distorts space-time. And what she's saying is that the physics is trying to minimize the gap between those two, and that work is done to minimize the gap. Down at the other end of the spectrum is Araki entropy, which is quantum relative entropy. And then somewhere in the middle is Friston's variational free energy, or expected free energy, which is variational free energy to minimize relative entropy in the future. And what's interesting is this kind of, what is emerging is this generalized relative entropy as the mechanism to describe what Bateson would describe as the difference that makes the difference, which is the physics of information and not the observer-dependent relative constructions of Shannon-like entropies. And so I think what's interesting for me is this generalized relative entropy and thermodynamic work as the basis for trying to explain information in the physics of systems.
And this is all new to me, Anthony. Could you
Anthony,
please?
can you give us references? Can you give us references to that work? That's fascinating.
Yeah, could
Yeah.
you? Yeah. And listen, I'm too dumb for
Absolutely,
chat.
absolutely.
Could you please email it to me?
Nice.
Of course, delighted to. Yeah.
My excuse is age.
Nice.
It's an excuse because any competent person would have figured out how to use chat. But no, I'm probably the oldest person in the group at almost 87. You don't want to have to keep learning new things. You know, I
Sorry,
was
I
born
didn't
in
mean to do that.
39, and I thought it was pretty neat to learn how to ride a bicycle.
Nice.
Well, I think I can speak for everyone and how much we absolutely adore you and view our relationship with you with the reverence it deserves, Stuart
Well,
Kauffman.
that's very sweet, but you're my wife. You might be a little biased.
No, 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 no.
But look,
You
no,
had
look,
me at Origins of
but,
Order a
Yeah.
long time ago.
oh,
We all, we
I
all
love
saw
you too.
that.
But what is relative entropy, please?
Wait, before
Um,
we wait, can I
yeah.
say interject as the moderator right quick? So we're at time, guys, and there's two other folks that have their hands up and they haven't spoken yet. So
Let's do it.
I wondered if we could, if Parande and Yoav, if you guys could kind of put your question in the form of a comment so that it doesn't take too long. Is that if it's not possible, you don't have to do it, but just a suggestion, and then we could move quickly and maybe only go 5 minutes over time or something.
Yeah,
And
just please do it, you two.
go ahead, Ferrandi.
Yeah, thank you. This was very fascinating. I liked your example of the 10 million Mondrian pixels on the wall, and that to us the whole Mondrian picture appears only when we connect all the pixels. But in your example that you can't erase a family member, otherwise the whole system collapses. I also think there's no pixel without its previous or prior state as part of the Mondrian it connects to. So even when the pixels are scattered, I have the feeling that maybe a more intelligent being could read the entire Mondrian form from one single pixel. Because it's connected to its previous state. There is no pixel without its whole, if that makes sense. So to relate it to biology, there are some reports that suggest that organ transplant receivers, they develop behavior traits of the donors, like starting to play the piano because the donor was a pianist. And
Really?
yeah, and
Fantastic.
these are just some reports, and it makes me wonder that even something as small as an organ is a pointer that's still entangled to where it came from. So
Well, look, Paul, please send that.
okay.
Certainly to me. Well, let me just raise the question. Let's assume that it's true. Okay, you have my kidney, and all of a sudden you're doing weird things like trying to play the drums. I'm a very mediocre jazz drummist. So, well, I'm a little better than mediocre. So suppose it's true that you get my kidney and you find yourself playing drums. Suppose that that's true. How could it be true? And I have no idea what the answer is, but let me pause. we keep thinking DNA, RNA, protein synthesis and stuff, and then we think of things like, okay, neurons firing. What if there really is some sense of Aristotelian form? And if my kidney is in you, it alters the form that is you.
Mhm.
Could we begin to make sense of that possibility? Having wondered if it could conceivably make sense, I kind of think maybe. Maybe. If you have, suppose you've got this big autocatalytic thing that's got, that's constructing itself, and you swap in some new minimum module that's self-constructing, but it interacts all the others in this big organized thing called a max RAF. Could the whole thing become different? And maybe it could, maybe because there's a form of heritable structure. It has nothing to do with DNA encoded protein synthesis or neurons firing. So just to say, it's fascinating, and there may be new things to think about. It's about the most that one can reasonably say. It's fascinating.
Awesome.
And you were going to say something about that, and I interrupted you, and we're over time. Please continue, and I'll shut up.
Oh, no, thank you for that comment. Yeah, the thing is that, we consider the past as something that is gone, but in one of Mike Levin's experiments, if you change the bioelectric state of a planaria, then its head shape changes into a form of a head shape of a planaria of a million years apart. And so that
Right.
suggests to me that somehow the present state planaria is still entangled to all of its previous states that came before, just like the pixel is still entangled to the whole painting, just like the organ is still entangled
And,
to.
and exactly, because I mean, I want to talk to Mike about this. If we take the idea of the Aristotelian form as causally efficacious, the idea is now a month old. What does it have to do with what Mike's
Okay,
telling us?
he's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Mike.
Oh, hi. Dr. Shapira, are
I
you
just come back from an exercise course, so I'm not up on the current conversation.
okay? Are you asking a question or no?
No,
Oh, okay. Okay, thank
I'm
you.
just joining in.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Hi, James.
Appreciate We're just wrapping up.
I see.
We're on the last couple of questions and then we're just wrapping up the meeting.
But you're the perfect person to whom this confused discussion, I don't know how to finish the sentence. But it's the idea, Jim, it's the idea of, I think I'm finding beginning grounds to suppose that life instantiates Aristotle's form and vegetative soul because living structures construct themselves. And I don't know how to, first of all, I think it's probably true, Jim. And I don't know how it relates to DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis, which somehow it does. So it's really quite new and quite confusing. It'd be fun to talk sometime.
Totally.
There's a last thing, right, Charlie?
Yes, you have.
Yeah, please.
Yes, thank you, Stuart. I actually share quite a bit of what you're suggesting, although I think that it requires a simpler explanation in just in physics terms, and I think this is actually not only possible but also quite easy. But this is not really the main comment that I'd like to make. The main comment I'd like to make is that the current view that you presented is kind of ignoring something that is really essential for consideration of self-constructing organizations that are as complex as biological organisms. And just to clarify this a bit, the complexity of a biological organism is way beyond something that can be computed. So these are really non-computable systems. You cannot predict the exact state of those systems. It varies all the time. They explore all the time. And the one thing that you cannot avoid in those systems is variation. So they constantly vary on every possible scale that you want to consider. And recognizing that calls into critical question the ability or what is required in order to have self-construction of such complex organization. What does it mean to self-construct it? Because there's no copy of it. There's no copy of you. There's no copy of anybody. And in a few seconds, you're already going to be different because a lot of you is constantly under flow. So in order to think about such self-sustaining complex organization, there must be we must address the question of how and what is required for for self-construction, okay? And what exactly is self-construction and what is required for it? Because it's not like a simple system of a few autocatalytic components. This is an engineered system, okay? Like if you want to consider some autocatalytic systems, there's not much to consider. It's already worked out, and it's not a conceptual problem at all. The conceptual problem is to explain how a system that is far too complicated for exact control or computational prediction can still reorganizes on the fly all the time and sustains itself in a characteristic pattern of organization or characteristic attractors.
That's brilliant. Let me try to echo. You sound Israeli, and your name is. Are you in Israel?
Yep.
Gonan Ashkenazi is within 100 miles of you in the Ben Gurion. So
Yep.
please email me so we can actually be in touch. Let me try to say back to you what I think you're saying. And you've raised a wonderful question, and it is conceptual. So let me try to say it. So think of a reproducing bacterium. It's full of a whole bunch of molecules and water and stuff, and things are happening.
Yep.
If you ask what is happening, let me back. Let's take Gonan's autocatalytic set. Well, we know what we're talking about. Peptide 1 catalyzes a second copy of peptide 2 by ligating the two fragments he puts in, and it really does. So we think we know what we're talking about. Meanwhile, now let's take the bacterium. Not only does every part have myriad subsets of causal processes and properties, they're around and available all the time. So I get this far, which is part of the confusion. Any one of those subsets of causal properties is ever available to be co-opted for a new function. But why do they all work together? Because selection acts on the whole, and all these things have to function together. So there's some sort of coherence to continue to persist. Somehow, selection acts at the level of the whole, not the parts. And how do we know in the cell that at any moment in time, what a given thing is doing is what, quotes, it's supposed to do? Maybe it's, quotes, doing something else. So I'm fascinated by liquid.
Why do you think it's supposed to do something?
Exactly.
Where is this requirement coming from?
Yeah, no, your point is that's me. That's stupid. All that has to happen is this thing keeps persisting, otherwise it croaks.
Yep.
And so what you're saying is the complete indefinite openness.
Also doesn't need a purpose, let
No, of
alone
course not.
consciousness.
Sure. So what you're pointing at is my way of saying it is that we cannot define what we're talking about because there's no complete description of the world. Yet what's going on in the cell at any moment are things and processes that have consequences, such that on average you get a second bacterium. And we don't know at any instant in time whether this molecule has catalyzed a reaction or maybe fortuitously absorbed a photon and emitted something in an excited state. There was a happy electron, and therefore, and in that sense, it's not computable because we don't know what the relevant variables are. Well,
Yeah, but
and you said
one thing that you can know for certain is that there is no need for such a detailed description in order for this thing to exist, right? So
yeah,
the bacteria cannot compute itself, cannot think about itself, and cannot deal with any of this, but it can still exist.
And it just does it. It's just so amazing, Yoav. And we've been doing it for 4 billion years, right?
Yep.
So you just said the puzzle. You know, you haven't said it. You feel that this is. I immediately
it's not necessarily a puzzle.
go to the
I
Tao.
think there is an easy solution to it. I don't think it's a it's a puzzle if there's no solution, but there is an easy solution for that.
Not one that can be pre-stated.
Excuse me?
Well, can you say ahead of time what the solution is? See, I think it gets very close to the Tao.
Well, I think you can actually recapitulate this ability by well, in a particular class of dynamical system that has certain general properties that enable the organization to create such an interface with the outside world that through which the outside world exert stabilizing forces on this organization. So basically, and this is actually quite similar to what you were suggesting, that you have like positive reinforcement between organization and energy flows from the outside that exert stabilizing forces on this very organization. But that again ignores the question of how you would create such an interface in an extremely complicated and fluidic system that still has this property of sustaining itself. And it turns out that this can actually be reconstituted without fine-tuning, simply by relying on certain topological features of the organization. And I can show this actually mathematically, how you can create arbitrarily complex systems that sustain themselves in characteristic organization without you being able to predict their exact state, and they would sustain arbitrary, quite a wide range of sabotages and perturbations that you could do to them, and they will not collapse. They will just move from one attracting set to another attracting set. They can collapse, though. They're not guaranteed to sustain themselves, but they have an incredible power of sustaining themselves outside thermal equilibrium in a characteristic shape. You can predict the overall features of, like you can predict that tomorrow I will still have one head and 4 limbs and and characteristic shape of the heart, and on and on and on. So you'd still be able to predict the coarse-grained features of the system without being able to predict the exact state.
Nice. So we're hoping Yoav that you'll present that to us at a meeting
Yeah,
sometime
I'd be
soon.
happy to present it, yes.
Hopefully in September.
So, Yoav, can you please send a bunch of references? Not in chat. I mean, I'm too dumb. Could you just email them to me?
Yeah, I'll send you some.
Where are you in Israel?
In Rehovot.
Are you at a university or something?
I'm at the Weizmann Institute.
Do you know Donan Lancet?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Doran. So we're very. Do you know Gonan Ashkenazi?
I only by reputation, not I never met him.
Why don't I would like to suggest that I connect you if you send me your email. You already know Doron, and we get together with Gonan Ashkenazi. There's a group that includes Gonan and Erstroth Mari and others, trying to actually do experiments now with peptides and small molecules to make self-constructing systems. And let me just connect you in, and let's have and get Doron because it's lovely, and we just talk.
Awesome.
Oh, okay, wonderful. I'll send you something and we'll follow up.
Great, Charlie. This is great.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much, Stuart. And I think we all share some of that reverence that your wife offered for your work. And,
Look, the important thing, Charlie, are the suspenders. I mean, you got suspenders, and Kate thinks it's kind of sexy, which is all right.
It buys you a lot of respect around here. The suspenders.
Yeah, and Anthony said this stuff. Look,
Yeah.
Charlie. Listen, I shall make a claim. I think I have defined a sufficient condition for agency. I think it does not include qualia. Qualia are real. If we can get agency out of a non-ergodic universe and things that construct themselves and therefore persist, and therefore normativity is real, that's a lot. And I would be grateful if this group says, well, is this right? Is it almost right? Is it dumb? How much can we build off of it?
Yeah.
Charlie, I think it's fundamentally right. I do really, after 50 years. I think this is agency. And I think, I think a bacterium's got it. And a stentor's got it. So I think anyway, I've said it all. Please critique and think about it. Yoav, if you've got the beginnings of a way of saying this sort of indefinite whole, it's this weird indefinite wholeness that you're saying. That's wonderful. And I don't know if there's any physicists in this group. Please join. Newton's fine. It's all of physics. Evolving life needs things more than we've done in physics, and it's wondrously puzzling.
Well,
Great.
I usually try to assume as a working assumption that we are dealing with physical systems, and I don't want to assume more than that because I wouldn't know what to do with it. So,
of course, they're what's weird, is that these are just classical physical systems.
Yep.
Gonan said it's a classical physical system that is simultaneously catalytically and construction closed. And so is a bacterium.
Nice. Okay, guys, I'm going to cut it off now because we're 22 minutes over time. But
Right,
thank you guys so much. And
listen, thank you, because I sort of wandered off topic.
Not at all.
So I got back to it. It got a little discombobulated. Thank you all.
We were all right there with you. Thanks so much, guys. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks for Anthony's presentation on mitochondrial crista and global.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, very cool.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.